Hey Barbarians, I'm back again with another build guide video. This time I'll be talking about Charge again. And this has been my favorite build of the season. I just have Charge and Whirlwind. Whirlwind's only purpose really is to increase the power of Charge, to swap weapons to give us more overpower procs, and to allow us to easily reposition for our next charge. Essentially, with enough ranks of charge, Bear Clan Brawler, or Bear Clan Berserker on a ring, and the occasional use of the Martial Glyph, we should be able to have 100% uptime on our charge and our berserking, and there should be no problem at all, dominating all content and all bosses. Because charge allows us to move so quickly, we can speed through any content we need to without having to stop to fight anything. Whirlwind also allows us to move while attacking, which is a great benefit to using Whirlwind instead of something else. Oh, you little piece of trash. All of you, die. Some people say the weakness of Charge is that it's bad on bosses. However, I've found personally that Charge is good enough to defeat every boss in the game in a single hit if you're going with the overpower style of Charge. There is a second version of Charge that I've been working on with part of the community who are hopelessly in love with bleed builds. They were very sad when I put out my video about overpower Charge. They thought I was betraying them. But I'm still working on the bleeding charge build too. It's just a little less compelling. When you can kill everything in the game in one hit, there's really no reason to leave things alive, to cause them to bleed or anything like that. Just feels like pointless. Actually, this is a very good example of where a bleed build would have an advantage. Instead of killing all of these enemies immediately, we could keep them alive and push them in front of us continuously, like a snowplow. And by doing that, we could have a nice large collection of enemies to use as a sort of accelerant to allow us to get through the level quickly without having to stop and gather up more enemies or run around, use Whirlwind. We can just constantly push enemies in front of us. The problem with that build, unfortunately, is even if you spec into Rend, you need to put a lot of ranks into Charge to keep its cooldown low. And Charge does so much damage, nothing survives. So even if you're trying to sort of work backwards and create a build that doesn't do instant damage and find a reason for that to be advantageous, it still doesn't work because Charge is just so overpowered right now. Even if you try to make a bleed build with Charge in it, Charge just steals the spotlight. But maybe at some point in the future, in this patch or some other patch, they'll give us content where we can't kill everything in a single hit, and then having the bleeding charge variant will become very useful. Again, the purpose of the bleeding charge build that I've called Gore Plow is to keep a nice, large, healthy collection of enemies alive in front of you so that you can constantly plow through them, triggering power charge to reset your charge cooldown. Theoretically, that should allow you to get through the level faster than any other build. Let's see what we got here. Maybe a new amulet or charge legs. Who knows? I'm currently leveling up Blood Feeder because that's an important part of this build that I've recently added. The build planner will be available in the description of the video, and I'll be constantly updating that as well. So, let's have a look at the planner. So, I have 3 versions of this build that I'm currently working on. One is pretty similar to what we just saw. I have the 0 cooldown charge using Bear Clan Berserkers, a amulet with ranks of brawling skills on it. We use Tybalt's Will. Charge gives us unstoppable, so Tybalt's gives us 40% more damage and 50 resources. We never run out of resources. We have plenty for Whirlwind. It's an interesting idea to run Selig with this build, since you're constantly overproducing Fury. You would have a lot to protect yourself with. However, that would mean you wouldn't get ranks of brawling skills, which you need. That might be viable if you had Evernight, Tuning Stone, or Shaco to pick up the slack. Other features of this version of the build are the Ravenous Ring. Although we don't put ranks into Rend, we do use this ring to automatically swap from our charge weapon to our Rend weapon in the blink of an eye, which allows us to proc Earth Striker more frequently. I have Earth Striker on a 2-hand, as well as Veteran Brawlers. Our damage from charge is extreme. I also run Brawlers, so when we have a huge number of enemies stacked up in front of us, if any one of them dies, it sets off a chain reaction and they all explode. And the Edge Masters, because it'll increase the damage of charge, as well as any Rend, which admittedly is insignificant at this point. I run Ghostwalkers on my boots. Some people are concerned that this will make charge fail to work properly, as you'll pass through the enemies. But charge pushes enemies with your weapon, not your body, so that's not a problem. I have Ancestral Charge on the gloves, and I'm running Juggernauts on my chest, as well as damage reduction and max life. Tusk Helm is a great choice for any Barbarian build, in my opinion, so that's my helmet of choice. I'm going to skip ahead to the optimal build. This is best in slot. Really, the major changes are that I've added Harlequin Crest, Grandfather, Ring of Starless Skies, and awkwardly enough, I'm also running Banished Lord's Talisman and Rage of Haragath, and I'll explain why in a moment. You may be concerned that losing Bear Clan Berserker will mean your charge cooldown is obnoxious. That's possible, but this particular variant is set up for one-tapping bosses. So whatever the cooldown of charge happens to be, it doesn't matter, because the boss will die after a single hit. So the reason I've got the reason I've got Banished Lord's Talisman and Rage of Haragath, well, Banished Lord's Talisman gives us the ability to more than double our damage when our crits overpower. And as a few of us have mentioned recently, in contrast to HotA or Upheaval, charge has no way to guarantee that it crits. You can't use Red Ring of Furor with it. It's not set up to work that way. So this, if you have a high crit chance, is extremely valuable, even though it gives ranks to core skills, which is kind of pointless, and resource generation, which you don't need. The unique aspect is so good that we're going to build our entire character around it, basically. And that actually explains why I have Rage of Haragath. But before I get into that, let me show you something that I didn't know was possible until recently. So, I've set up this character just so that I get the perfect amount of critical strike chance. As I'm hovering over it in the planner, you can see here my crit chance is 60%. Not bad, right? So let's start with 60. Rage of Haragath gives us critical strike chance against elites with physical damage. That's not factored into the stat sheet, so let's add it now. 72. Not bad. We also are running Blood Feeder, which gives us another 5% crit chance against bleeding enemies. So let's add 5 here. I've also picked up Flawless Technique. Damaging enemies with one-hand weapons increases your crit chance up to 8%. And that's 8% for 4 seconds with all of your attacks. It's not just with one-handers. You use one-handers to proc it, and then it stays up. So, assuming we whirlwind on the boss for 2 seconds before charging into them, we'll get an extra 8%. So let's add 8. At this point, we have 85% crit chance. And since it's Season 3, we're going to run Efficiency Support Tuning Stone for another 15%. And that gives us 100% chance to crit. And now, we'll benefit from the Banished Lord's Talisman on every single hit that overpowers, because every single hit will crit. That sounds fun. Let's look at the Paragon board some more. So in the first board, I've got Blood Feeder. The additive damage of this is insignificant, just here for the crit chance against bleeding enemies. In Blood Rage, I've got my standard setup of a willpower glyph in the board. We pick up the Blood Rage node, we pick up the Enraged Rare Cluster, and I've got Brawl here. There's not much that Brawl's doing for us other than giving us 18% more damage with charge, but that's a very good bonus, and there's not many better places to put Brawl, unfortunately. The effect that it has on Paragon nodes within range is extremely limited. As far as I can tell, it only applies to increasing your armor and your physical damage. It doesn't increase damage against vulnerable enemies. It doesn't increase berserking damage that I know of. So it doesn't matter too much where we put this. It might be a little bit better down in this board if you want to multiply the armor nodes, or if you wanted to pick up raw power, it would multiply that. But I feel like it's maybe just a plus or minus 1% efficiency to try to make that work. So I also go and pick up fire resistance here in Blood Rage. In the Warbringer board, I've put Ire. I could spend some extra points to increase the value of Ire here. And I've got the conditioned rare node to increase resistances to all elements. We go up into Flawless Technique, pass through a couple of cold resistance nodes, and get the Flawless Technique node. To the left of Blood Rage, there's Carnage. As usual, I've put Martial here. Might also works. We want to multiply our damage reduction from close enemies and our berserking damage. You'll notice I've picked up a few dexterity nodes here, which are unnecessary. You can actually path around this one without too much of a hassle, but I wanted the dex nodes because it gets us right up to 100% crit chance. If we're not running enough dex, we don't get that. I've also got damage while berserking and cold resistance as usual. I picked up a few extra armor nodes as well. Down here we've got Bonebreaker, which I run for the damage reduction while healthy and the overpower damage. We put Might here to multiply those up and increase our damage with two-hand weapons. Last but not least, up at the top, we've got Decimator with Crusher. This will increase our damage with overpowers. We also deal increased damage when we make enemies vulnerable or overpower them. And we've got damage reduction from vulnerable enemies. Since we don't run Exploit, we're not going to proc the first effect of Decimator ourselves. Our Seneschal pet has breaking support on it, so it will make enemies vulnerable, but that does not proc Decimator. However, when you overpower a vulnerable enemy, you'll get both halves of this bonus. There is one more version of this that I'm very excited about. So here I have the version that I call Gore Plow that I described earlier. The idea here is to create a bleeding build that instead of crushing everything with overpowers in one hit, we keep everything alive, fill them with bleed damage, and drag them along with us in the level as we clear to allow us to proc power charge over and over and over, so we're never running through an empty room. We've always got a pile of enemies in front of us that are slowly building up an incredible amount of bleed damage. Eventually, these enemies will fall off the plow and slowly bleed to death in our wake, which sounds both disgusting and delightful. So in this board, the setup is almost identical. I've pathed a little bit farther up into Flawless Technique to pick up extra critical strike damage, and I've got a little bit of damage reduction from close enemies. To make room for that, I dropped the Bonebreaker board that has overpower damage because that will not help us deal more bleeding damage. We still run Earth Striker because we still want to overpower. The reason for that is we're running Gushing Wounds. That's right. I thought Gushing Wounds would be trash, but if you can get 100% crit chance, this scales incredibly well. This adds more DPS to a bleed build than any other key passive, as long as your crit chance is up around 50% or more, and you have the Grandfather. So this is a very much an end game build. It's very difficult to actually get all the gear necessary to make this bleed optimal. And unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, when I try to run this build, I can't help killing everything by accident with Charge's direct damage. There's no opportunity for Rend to do anything because Charge kills everything immediately. It's too strong. This build currently is pretty pointless because Charge makes it like a waste to bother with anything else. It's completely unnecessary. Just charge everywhere all the time. That's the answer to all content for all Barbarians this season. I did stack Rend. This build is available in the planner if you're interested. But as I said, it's theoretically useful and very interesting to like run the numbers and get 100% crit chance and think about Gushing Wounds working, and then you've got a stack of 100 enemies in front of your plow, and then Earth Striker procs and they all explode with a bleed. That sounds incredible. In practice, nothing lives that long because Charge is too strong. So this is it's fun and it's got a fun name, but it's completely pointless right now. So we'll see if maybe they give us some tougher content or maybe tune down the direct damage of Charge at all. One thing I do want to mention though about the direct damage of Charge that is exciting is the aspect Berserk Ripping. Never worked very well with Charge before because Berserk Ripping damage is based on your skill's base damage. Charge could do a lot of damage with Veteran Brawler, but Veteran Brawler did not increase the damage of Berserk Ripping because Berserk Ripping is based on the base damage. So when they increased the power of Charge and decreased the power of Veteran Brawler, it seems like it was intended to create some sort of balance. But one unintended, maybe, side effect of that is that Berserk Ripping with Charge is much better than it used to be, 10 times better. So that would be very interesting to run Berserk Ripping in a Charge bleed build. Also, because Charge frequently stuns things, it would be very interesting to run Skullbreaker. But again, the purpose of this build wasn't to actually kill things right away. It was to load them up with bleeds, keep them alive long enough to accelerate us through the level, and then let them die behind us once they fall off the plow or turn unstoppable or whatever. I dropped Tybalt's Will because we're going to need ranks of Charge for the cooldown. We're also going to need a place to put Juggernaut, so I put that there. And again, we're running Rage of Haragath, which is a very interesting choice. People don't usually run this, ever. But it does give us crit chance which is unheard of on a chest armor, and without this we can't hit 100%. Also, the rend that procs off of charge using Ring of the Ravenous does proc the Rage of Haragath unique effect, so that'll help us keep down the cooldowns of not only charge, but also all of our shouts as well. Sounds good. And one last thing people have asked about Mortal Draw. Unfortunately, as I explained in a previous video, Mortal Draw does not actually give you 18% crit chance. Let's go look at it now. Mortal Draw says, swapping weapons has an 18% chance to cause the skill's damage to critically strike. Sounds like it's saying it gives you an 18% chance to crit. It increases your crit chance 18%. But that's not what it actually does. In testing, it's been proven multiple times that this is a separate roll. Essentially, you get your chance to crit roll, and then you get your mortal draw roll. And you could crit because either your crit chance is high enough, or you got an 18% on your mortal draw roll. This has less and less value the closer and closer you get to 100% crit chance. So even though we're constantly swapping weapons with this build, Mortal Draw is bad for us. This glyph is good very early in the game, especially with like a Whirlwind build, where maybe you have only 30% chance to crit, and then you can snapshot Mortal Draw into the entire instance of Whirlwind. But as you get higher and higher in the game, and then you pick up Dire Whirlwind, and you can get your crit chance to 100% without Mortal Draw, it becomes totally pointless to run this. It slowly becomes worse and worse as your crit chance gets higher and higher. So I'm not sure if that's what they intended. Seems like probably not. I would imagine that all the glyphs are meant to be useful at all stages in the game. So maybe they'll change this in the future. One other thing, Mortal Draw does not affect Gushing Wounds, because Gushing Wounds has a chance to proc equal to your critical strike chance. And since Mortal Draw does not affect your critical strike chance, it does not affect Gushing Wounds. Well, I think I've said enough. Hopefully you're as excited about 100% crit chance overpower charge, whether it's the direct damage boss one-tapping version or the completely useless and disgusting Gore Plow version that I've made up. Maybe it'll become relevant at some point in the future, but as I said, currently, charge kills everything in one hit, so bleed damage is pointless. But thanks for watching. Let me know what you think.